What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
Welcome back to Tech Girl Financial Podcast and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to all our listeners. Wow, 2022. Here we go, Kim. A whole new ride around the sun.
I know.
I
do everything hard in the even years. So come on, 2022.
Ooh,
the challenge is on.
The challenge is on. Well, it's so good to have you back on the program. I missed you.
I missed you.
Yeah, I had a great conversation with our good friend Matt. So thank you to Matt for joining us in the last one. And today we've got a great guest joining us.
Yes, I am really excited to be speaking with Ryan Issakainen.
I think Issakainen. Right? Yeah, I think you got Issakainen. Yes. I mean, it was challenged. I had to ask him, how did we say your last name? Because that is quite a great last name. So Ryan is joining us from First Trust. He's an exchange-traded fund strategist, and we're going to talk about how do you invest in infrastructure? Why do we need to invest in infrastructure? And then at the same token, try to talk about what are some of the best opportunities going forward. And I thought it would be a great kickoff for the new year for him to come on the program and share his thoughts.
Absolutely. And we all have to keep in mind infrastructure is a very broad term. And we will hear from Ryan how broad it is.
So without further ado, here is our conversation with Ryan, and then we'll be right back. So it gives us great pleasure to welcome to the program Ryan, who's joining us from New York. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Now, I had the good fortune of seeing you speak when you were out visiting the West Coast in Palo Alto a little earlier this year, and I was so impressed by your presentation and the things that you had to share that I had to get you on the podcast. And so I came home and I told Kim all about it. We said, what a great guest. So thank you so much for joining us. And I thought that we'd get started by you providing us a little bit of a background on who is Ryan and how'd you get to First Trust?
Yeah, so, well, I have actually spent the last 22 years at First Trust. And so I've spent about half my life as a guy in his mid-40s at this firm. And as it probably, given that information might not surprise you, I started shortly after I finished college. I spent the summer after college backpacking around Europe for a couple months and came home and had to find a job. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought, I want to help people. But this was right before the dot-com bubble burst and the height of, Y2K concerns. And a lot of my friends were going into technology, and I really wasn't sure what was going to be the best fit for me. And as happenstance would have it, I ended up applying for a job at First Trust, which we were then called Nike Securities. We were a little firm in the western suburbs of Chicago. And as it turned out, it was something that I grew to appreciate and love because I did get to help people. I got to work with, a tremendous network of financial professionals and help them as they help their clients. And I was able to really see kind of the bigger picture of things, not just, figuring out what are some interesting investments to invest in, but really to help people as they help their clients invest for retirement or to send their kids to college or to build a nest egg, or all these big picture things are part of what I get to do every day. And so, it's something that I early on fell in love with. And fortunately, our firm has flourished in the years since, and I've been able to be a part of a really great team here at First Trust. So it's been a great 2+ decades, and I'm looking forward to the next couple decades.
Well, I want to thank you, Ryan, because being a financial professional myself, I appreciate all the support that your team provides for us in terms of getting us up to date with what's going on in the economy, with trends and technology and everything else that you guys do to support us. So thank you. It really is nice to see people that have been there for a long time and the continuity of support is just wonderful.
That's always great to hear. And you're absolutely right. My team that we have at First Trust is fantastic. I'm working with some really world-class thinkers, folks that think outside the box. And that really our goal is to provide resources for the people that make the most impact on investors. And that is financial professionals like yourself. So that is really what we're passionate about at First Trust. That's, I think, one of the things that helps set us apart, what we're doing. We're not, we're not writing for academics or doing research for people that might have an ancillary role, but we're really, we think we've got the grassroots connection with people that have the biggest impact on investors. And again, that's people like yourselves.
Well, and I have to say, approachable is definitely the word that I like to use for our business. And, we're always really striving to be as approachable and available to our clients. And I notice, gosh, if I have a question about the economy or anything, usually even on Twitter, I can talk to, Brian or whoever else is out there and ask those questions, and I get a response. So it's really awesome to have that ability to hear from you guys.
Actually, your participation, Ryan, in this podcast is a testament to that, because we reached out to Ralph, who, shout out to Ralph here locally and in our community, who supported us to get you on the podcast. And it just goes to show, the support that we're getting from First Trust. I wanted to get into the details here because you have so much to share, and I want to make sure that we get through it, and mindful of your time. Your title is listed, at least on the website, as an exchange traded fund strategist. So what does an exchange traded fund strategist do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have at our firm about 190 different exchange traded funds, and exchange traded funds are nothing more than a tool that you can use to help build a portfolio that's focused either on a very specific area of the market or maybe a broad area of the market. And so my job as an ETF strategist is to provide information, analysis, resources to financial professionals, so you have a better idea of the ways that you can best use our funds as you build client portfolios. And again, we've got a number of different solutions in our lineup, and that has continued to grow over the past 15 or so years since we got into the ETF business. But again, I am involved in writing the research and putting together some different thoughts on how we fit into a portfolio, how we compare to some of our peers in the industry, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. In your presentation, when I saw it in Palo Alto earlier this year, you focused a lot on thematic investing. And I know that ETFs can be used exactly to address themes. And so we wanted to get into the weeds here by talking about how do you invest in infrastructure? Because I think there's a lot of fascinating things that are happening in this country. Obviously, a lot of focus on this at an executive level and in a Congress. So can you share with us a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, so when we're talking about infrastructure, it's really the underlying systems that allow these new technologies, whether it's talking about green energy or the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, or whether we're talking about the power grid that underlies that, or whether we're talking about just transporting something as simple as water from one place to another. All of that is sort of the underlying framework. And the reality is when we look across different types of infrastructure, and this has been a theme that we've talked about a lot over the last few years, much of it is either in need of repair, in need of modernization, or in need of being built out for the first time because of new technology. And so, we provide different focused investment products to help ask the question or answer the question of, if these infrastructure themes play out as we think they will, what sort of companies will benefit? And that's really the sorts of companies that we want to put inside of our exchange traded funds at First Trust.
So let's talk about that then, getting more into the conversation about infrastructure. And it's we know it's broad. A lot of times I'm thinking roads. But I know, as you mentioned before, it's a lot of different areas. So what are the current trends going on there, and where do you see the priority being in terms of infrastructure?
Yeah, no, that is a great observation. When we think about infrastructure, a lot of times it's roads and bridges. It's that transportation infrastructure, airports, all these transportation focused infrastructure. And certainly that is a piece of infrastructure. But thinking about the clean energy transition, so the movement from where the system has been and developed over the last 100+ years, where you've got centralized generation of electricity by burning coal, or maybe in a gas turbine and generating electricity that way, and everything kind of flows downstream to consumers of electricity. That system has been in place for a long time, and it's developed and it works fairly well. But the trends that we've seen emerge over the last decade is that renewable energy is beginning to offset those sorts of more dirty burning fossil fuels. And for years, this was an issue where it had been focused more on maybe whether or not you believed that climate change was something that needed to be addressed, or whether or not you had a certain set of political or ideological beliefs. And that was really what had been a big driver of whether or not you thought we should transition to renewable energy. But what has happened and has emerged over the last decade is that trends have been in place that have forced costs lower for renewable energy. So when we're talking about renewable energy, we mean things like solar power, wind power, which had for years been not economically viable without government support and tax credits and all of these incentives to try to make those investments worthwhile. Well, costs have come down, and we can talk about that more in a minute, to a point where it is now economically viable. And in order for any of that to take place, we need to have a different sort of distribution network, a different way to transport electricity from one place to another. The old systems are not well suited for that. And so that is one big part of that infrastructure discussion. What companies will benefit if we're going to make a transition from burning fossil fuels to create electricity where everything flows downstream to consumers, whether that's individual households or businesses? How are we going to actually have a more distributed grid that is coming from different nodes in different places where maybe there's a wind farm or a solar plant or something like that? It's a different set of infrastructure, and it will require massive investments to take place. And so that is one part of the infrastructure story that we think is really compelling, because we do see these trends in place now and reaching a point of where they're not just maybe desirable from a clean air and clean water standpoint, and from a conservation standpoint or from an ideological standpoint, but also now from an economic standpoint. These are now technologies that have really reached a tipping point.
So if I'm getting this right, because I happen to listen to some people at PG&E, which is our gas and electric company locally, and they were saying that, and we live in California, so a lot of people have gone to solar energy on their house. You see the panels almost everywhere in every neighborhood these days. But the problem with PG&E is that they're having to keep up these boxes, even though they're not being paid anymore, because it's all on solar. And I imagine this is an issue when you start talking about, yes, we've upgraded, some of us have upgraded to solar. However, the old infrastructure, the boxes, we're still using from the past, and the resources aren't as good as they were before because they're not making money on the solar.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And for years we wanted to incentivize people to put solar panels on their roofs, or to have incentivize the utilities to build utility scale solar farms. And because solar was more expensive, you had to provide certain level of incentive, whether that's a tax credit or something similar to that. So from an economic standpoint, you were kind of understanding that would be a bit more expensive. It would be a bit of a loss, but as costs came down, it would be beneficial. And looking back just 5 or 6 years ago, you're talking about solar, even utility scale solar, which tends to be more efficient and a little bit cheaper or much cheaper, was still, 5 or 6 years ago, 2 to 3 times as expensive as a coal burning utility. And so, again, you had to have those incentives and those tax credits in place. But really, as the technology has gotten more efficient, as we've developed all these manufacturing economies of scale, effectively what that has done is brought costs for solar down to a point where it's now a much more attractive economical source of power. But to your point, the infrastructure doesn't work as well. And so now the utilities are at a point where, it's no longer something where they feel as though they need to have these sort of incentives and tax credits in place quite as much. And so there's discussions about, well, are we going to start to charge fees for having your solar panels hooked up to the grid, or maybe the rate at which you can sell excess power back to the system is going to maybe be a little bit less than it was before. But all of this is because we need to make investments in order for it all to work. At small scale, you can have some of these sort of one-off things, but when you've got larger scale and more nodes hooked up to that grid, you need to make investments. And that is, the rooftop solar is one example of that. Utility scale solar and wind is another example. And it's not just the boxes, that's certainly a piece. It's also just the distribution networks. When you think about the centralized nature of, say, a dirty coal burning, electricity source, that tends to be in one place, but that's not necessarily located in the place that has the best sunlight or the best solar resources or the most wind. And so you might have, if you're going to build out your solar capacity or your wind capacity, those solar and wind farms are located in different places. And so, the infrastructure part of that is also putting up new transmission lines and new wires and poles. It's new transformers, it's new superconductors, it's new ways to make that more intelligent. We call it a smart grid because it helps to manage the flow of electricity from your house to the grid and from the grid to your house. There's many parts of the country that are not nearly as advanced as California, where you really don't have the ability to have that two-way flow of electrons. And so all of this is incorporated in what we think about when we're talking about that infrastructure investment. And the size of this over the next few decades is expected to be really, really immense. One estimate is that over the next 3 decades, if we look around the world, so global investments, we need to invest something like $14 trillion on the power grid. And that was a 14 trillion with a T. Again, over a 30-year period to make the power grid more distributed, more resilient, and more digital so it can handle these new sources of power.
Oh my gosh, that's stressful. Trillions of dollars is a lot.
I know, you can't even imagine. Trillions are an unimaginable amount of money, but that's what it will require.
So it sounds like it's a massive undertaking to upgrade, the infrastructure, across all the different areas in order for us to be able to tap into renewable energy. But thereby, with this huge challenge, there is a lot of opportunity. And I think I remember reading, and perhaps maybe you shared some data around how other parts of the world that are building huge cities with the newest and latest and greatest as it relates to the infrastructure build. So how behind are we in the United States, contrast to maybe other parts of the world?
We are behind, but there are certain parts of the world that are more advanced. Let me put it that way. I would say that China has made big strides towards setting up some of their infrastructure. Part of that is because some of the places where they're building things out, they're not starting with an existing system. They're actually putting in a system for the first time, and so doing it at scale when you're not retrofitting something that's already in existence can sometimes be more efficient. But looking around the world, one of the statistics that's really fascinating to me is we're at a point now where costs have come down for renewable energy, wind and solar, to the point that it is now the most economical source of new power plants on an unsubsidized basis, so no government tax credits or anything like that, for people living in where 2/3 of the world population lives, which accounts for about 90% of overall electricity generation today. Again, in order for this more economical source of power that's also happens to be cleaner and meet some of the other objectives that people are hoping to achieve, and having cleaner air to breathe, no one can argue with that. But in order for that to take place, this is the infrastructure that has to take place as well. So, I would say when we look at certain parts of the world, they're more advanced than us. There are certainly much of the world, a lot of the emerging market communities and other places in the world that are even more behind than we are. Those investments are going to need to take place, and that's why I'm an ETF strategist, right? So I try to ask the question: if these trends play out, and maybe it's not 14 trillion, maybe it's 10 trillion, if these trends play out, what sort of companies will benefit from that? And that's one of the things that we try to think about as we're developing strategies for investment. We want to ask the question: if this trend plays out, what sort of companies will benefit?
And I think that's exactly what our listeners would be very interested in learning more about. Is we recognize that there is this massive undertaking that's going to require a lot of investment. And if there are companies that stand to benefit, how can we participate? And I think that that's where First Trust and obviously building some of these thematic exchange traded funds comes into play. We've talked a lot about wind, we've talked about solar, we've talked about energy, and of course, water. So there's a pretty wide, breadth of different areas to focus on. But one of the areas that I think our listeners would be very interested in learning more about is the development of 5G and this next generation computing, and specifically what kind of impact that might make. So can you share a little bit more about the 5G world?
Yeah, sure. And just for those that are asking, well, what do we mean by 5G? We're really talking about that next generation of mobile networks, which will make our mobile networks faster. It'll make them more resilient. It'll make them able to be connected with more devices with fewer lags. And one of the interesting things about the pandemic is that I think that over the last couple of years, some of those really high hopes that people had for what would be deployed by now have really been a little bit disappointing. I don't know about you guys, but I have a 5G phone, and candidly, I don't really notice that big of a difference between my 5G phone and what my 4G phone had done.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that maybe I can download a movie a few seconds faster, that's not going to change my life, right? And so, one of the things that we think about when we're thinking about 5G, and what our focus has been is on really the mobile phones. And that's because that's what 4G has really been all about. But one of the differences with the newer 5G networks that I think will play out in the next several years is the fact that these were networks that are not just developed to link in our phones at faster speeds, but the fact that these will allow literally billions of other devices to be hyper connected, to be connected to those mobile networks in ways that will add new efficiencies and productivity and new technology to our daily lives. And what I mean by that is, our automobiles. You may have a cell phone signal that you can get in your automobile, but you'll have a much faster and more distributed link through 5G networks. Traffic systems, cities, hospitals, factories, appliances, all of these other sorts of devices will be able to be linked into these 5G networks. And the reason they haven't been thus far is because 4G networks and the older generation of mobile networks can't hook in that many devices together. You can't have that, what we call hyperconnectivity of devices, because the capacity is limited. And you know that if you've ever sat in maybe a stadium and tried to post on social media or make a phone call or text somebody or something like that, it usually ends up being fairly constrained, and you have trouble getting a call out or a text out because the capacity is limited with 4G networks and earlier networks. 5G allows that hyperconnectivity, so you can connect all of these additional devices, and that is another way that it will sort of revolutionize that network. Most of that hasn't played out yet. We look at this as being a really early part of the story, but over the next few years, we're going to see new innovation that is going to come as a result of that next generation in mobile networks.
So I was just reading an article yesterday on Web 3.0, and I don't know how that starts to play into the whole conversation of 5G, but it's this idea, and I only vaguely understand it, of where we don't have a centralized internet, right? And things are relying more in their own area. That kind of goes into the whole discussion of blockchain, where we're using blockchains to create technology and to communicate and to do all of these other things besides just what everybody thinks of as cryptocurrency exchange when you talk about blockchain. So am I going in the right direction with that, or what do you think?
Yeah, it really is a really interesting time because all of these technologies are all building on one another. And so whether you're talking about, providing better access at faster speeds with 5G networks, or whether you're talking about cloud computing, which allows people to access their software or their infrastructure from any point around the country, where before it was maybe stored in a room full of servers, that were locally installed on your computers locally. Whether we're talking about edge computing or Internet 3.0 or blockchain technology, they're all interdependent. They're all based on building innovation upon one another. And that's really fascinating because it's almost as if, they don't exist without each other, but they accelerate one another. And it's an interesting time to be living, really,
right.
Because all of these innovations improve our standard of living and help us to make advances. And that's true with not just what we've talked about today. That's true with medicine. That's true with some of the innovations in biotechnology. Some of these other ways that our lives will change in the years ahead because of that building upon one another of these technologies.
I think we take 2 steps forward and then we take 1 step back because, when we started having this Internet of Things and our heater and our air conditioning and our pool and everything is connected to a cell phone or, our home internet. And then something happens to that home internet and everything is not working anymore. It creates some frustration. So I know that there are some challenges with all of this. And, we like to show our clients 2 sides of the coin, not just the exciting opportunities, but there is risk with all of this. So what are the challenges?
Yeah, no, and that is a great point. I think one of the major challenges that needs to be continually addressed is simply, some of those drop-offs or faults or things happen just by accident or, a glitch or something like that. But even worse is the need for cybersecurity, because some of it is intentional. Some of it is, folks trying to steal your information or, have a ransomware attack, or all of these other needs, all of these other vulnerabilities in our increasingly digital world. And that's another theme that I've talked about quite a bit in the last few years is just the fact that our world is becoming more and more digital every single day. And it's not just our computing systems or our communication systems. It's even something like an oil and gas pipeline. We think about, the oil and gas pipeline that was hacked earlier this year, that Colonial pipeline that shut down the transportation of fossil fuels for a much longer period than people thought. Well, who knew that cybersecurity was so important for something like an oil and gas pipeline? And that's becoming more and more true across the economy as it becomes more digital, as we have more Internet of Things devices, as we've got 5G networks that are hooked into more different devices, blockchain, cloud computing, all of this needs robust cybersecurity. And I look at that as being another theme that is going to be around for a long time. And there are companies that will really benefit from the continued demand for cybersecurity. So that's another theme that we've been very favorable towards for a long time.
Well, it's interesting just because I do monitor here at home, any new device that connects to our local Wi-Fi. And it seems with everything that we purchase that's new, everything is attaching to the Wi-Fi. So when I look at the router and I can see this online, there could at any one time be anywhere between 30 to 35 different devices that are some way connected to the Wi-Fi, which concerns me because, I want to be able to record podcasts. I want to be able to communicate with my clients, and I'm competing with the toaster, So we've unpacked so much today and talking about clean energy, water, infrastructure, 5G, and next generation computing. Ryan, when you go out, and I know you travel the country and visit with advisors and share, what is the main takeaway that you're hoping is really sinking in with people?
That is a good question. And what I hope to challenge people to think about is really to identify on the horizon where the opportunities are for growth, not just necessarily looking at what's in an index right now and saying, these are what's worked well over the last decade, and they're going to continue to work well, because the reality is that's usually not the case. When we think about 10 years ago and just look at a broad index like the S&P 500 and look at what was well represented, you had companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron, two broad energy companies, and there's nothing wrong with those companies, but there's certainly a much, much smaller portion of that index today because they have vastly underperformed over the last decade. Or a company like General Electric, which for years and years was one of the largest companies in America. 10 years ago, that was the 6th largest stock in the S&P 500. Today, it's much, much smaller. And so my point is the companies that are today well represented in the broad indexes are the ones that have performed the best in the past. And that's fine, and they may continue to do well. And you want to own those types of companies in a portfolio, in my opinion. However, if you really want to benefit from some of the trends that will drive market performance and drive economic growth over the next several years, these are the sorts of thematic investments that we want to talk about. We want to find ways to identify those themes that are underrepresented in most investors' portfolios today, and try to gain exposure to those themes in a smart and intelligent way.
That's so true. In a smart and intelligent way. That's what we're trying to get the most from. I know, people have a tendency to hear about these trends and then hone in on one specific company that they think is going to be the answer to all those questions. And we know that that's not necessarily the case. We also know sometimes the first to address a new complicated theme or solution for a problem isn't always the winner at the end of the day. And so being able to leverage talent and research in order to be able to invest in these concepts and trends in a way that makes more sense. Because, the thing that keeps hitting me in the head is it's a lot of risk. We don't know how soon the money is going to go there, and are we going to miss out on the way and having that money there instead of having it somewhere else?
Yeah, I really think that is a key point, and that is another key takeaway, because I can talk about these areas of growth and talk about these opportunities, and they may well grow at a rapid pace over the next several years. However, they are often accompanied with some volatility, and so that's why we think it's so important to work with investment professionals who have the needs and understand the needs of individual investors much better than I do. Because you need to figure out what the appropriate sort of allocation to one of these sorts of investments is in the context of someone's needs, someone's risk tolerance, the rest of their portfolio. You want to know how these are going to contribute to their goals. And that's really what is most important as we think about these sorts of investments. And again, that's why we at First Trust have built our business around providing resources, providing some thought leadership, and in conversation with financial professionals. We don't know what your clients' needs are, what their risk tolerance are. You do much better than we do. And so, we provide food for thought, we provide resources, we provide, maybe some thinking on how you can put some of these ideas into action. But ultimately, we understand that the financial professional is the one who's best suited and best in the best position to understand what your client's needs are.
That's right. And we are constantly balancing as financial professionals, risk, return, and opportunity cost in a nutshell with all of that. So, wow, this has been really fascinating talking about all of these different things.
Yes, Ryan, and we want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on the changing landscape and the need, for improved infrastructure in our country and at a global scale. And this is certainly something that if people invest in, that they'll benefit from. Better roads, better water, better energy, better computing. So it's one of those areas where you can see your investment dollars actually go to work.
That's so true. So it's fun. Our job really is about bringing our clients to their end destination or the goals that they have in mind for their families. But at the same time, being able to do it in a way that also improves where we go from here as, in our infrastructure and clean energy and all these different themes does help people, I think, when we're investing in things that they believe in.
Absolutely.
Well, what a great kickoff to the new year. Once again, Ryan, thank you for joining us on the program today. And hopefully, we'll be able to get you back on the show sometime down the road to see what else you've been out there talking to the rest of the country about.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to speak with you. Hope everyone has a healthy, prosperous 2022. And again, thanks for having me on. It's been nice talking with you.
All right.
Likewise. Thanks, Ryan.
Wow, what a great conversation.
One thing I notice when I'm looking at a portfolio, not of a client, but usually of somebody who's looking to get my advice and work with me in the future, is that if they hold exchange traded funds, they're typically very broad in nature. The S&P 500 index is probably the most widely held, but they'll use it for other things. And then I notice that sometimes people take a big risk on a certain stock, believing in a certain trend, such as, electric vehicles is probably the biggest one that I see. People want to invest in Tesla and get in quick, right? I don't know if you can say that anymore, but these are the things that I see investors do when left to their own devices. And so it's really fun today to have Ryan on and talk about these themes, talk about all the exciting technology, but not take so much risk to own one stock that is in that theme or that trend or that area of the marketplace. And so I think it's really nice. ETFs have come a long way from back in the late 1990s when they started, and really all you could have was the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones index fund. And now we have like thousands of, I don't know what the number of actual ETFs out there, but I'm sure it's in the thousands of opportunities. And so we really need to look through that all and weed out what's junk and what may be great opportunity.
Absolutely, Kim. And I think that one of the reasons why I think this thematic investing, especially using an exchange traded fund that is playing to a water theme or a wind theme or a solar energy theme, is that if you were going to invest in just one company, you'd have to get it right, that one company. And by going more through an exchange traded fund, it's further diversifies that opportunity so that you don't have to get the one company right as long as you're in the theme, but you can get the theme right.
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 Right. And even within the ETF world, there are those that are more active and those that are more passive. And I think with some of these trends that are happening, there's going to be a lot of winners, but there's also going to be a lot more losers. And so I think that the level of activity while investing in those areas is cannot be underplayed. It is so important. I also think that, with all of these opportunities, it's very easy for us to get excited about the opportunities and think they're all going to be home runs. But there are a lot of challenges and risks involved. And so, this is where I want to mention both sides of the coin, is to say that, working with somebody and being able to bounce those ideas off and keep this in perspective that these are opportunities, but there are a lot of risks. We don't know which ones are going to be the winners.
And this is why it's important to partner, at least having a relationship with the people who are doing this for a living, that are actually looking at these themes, creating the exchange traded funds, and making the specific selection as to what companies, what organizations are going to be part of this investment, because they've got all the data, they've got all the research, they've got the analysts that are making those decisions.
Just like the Kenny Rogers song, this is not a gamble, but the gambler said it best. You got to know when to hold them and know when to walk away. Know when to run.
Yeah, knowing when to run is the most important part of that whole song. Well, the other thing, too, that I wanted to bring up, which I think is important that Ryan mentioned, is this whole idea we don't invest in the past, we invest in the future. And so it's really looking down the road, as most investors should, in saying, what is the world going to look like in the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years, and wanting to make the investments in those areas of growth.
And even though you believe in something and may get emotionally attached to it, when you are talking about your investments, first rule of thumb is do not get emotionally attached to anything, because then it makes it harder to make the right decision. The hardest thing I think there is to do is to sell something because it's not working for you anymore. And so that's where we have to take the emotion out of this and invest in what's right for the future. But when it becomes no longer right, knowing when to get out.
And that's why people work with you and me, Kim, is because we take the emotion out of it to make those hard decisions, both on the buy, but more importantly, again, know when to run, when to sell.
Absolutely.
So what a great kickoff to 2022. So if you are interested in learning more about how you can invest in infrastructure and some of the themes that we talked about with Ryan today, you can reach out to us here at TechGirl Financial by email at victor@techgirlfinancial.com. You can also click contact us on our website.
Yes, we'd love to have the conversations about these areas of investment and opportunity. And we also want to keep it real to let you know that, when we're talking about an overall portfolio and reaching your goals, thematic investing is a part of it, but it's not everything. And so just to, again, keep it real, this is not all we do. But it's a portion in making sure we have the right portion of this in a portfolio to take advantage of opportunities, but also manage everything else that needs to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's got to be the right fit, right fit for the right person and such. But that's why you talk to us, because we'll help you figure that out.
Absolutely. So just remember, it's a piece of the pot.
So again, thank you for listening to the podcast and Happy New Year. We hope 2022 is everything that you want it to be. So thanks.
Thank you.
Talk to you next time.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. TechGirl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies. Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions.